Imagine waking up tomorrow, and the news is almost impossible to believe. Vladimir Putin has just announced Russia is going to invade the United States. Not sanctions, not threats, not another political speech. An actual attempt to bring the war to American soil. Within minutes, the world goes into panic. Stock markets begin crashing. Airports become chaotic. Governments call emergency meetings, and millions of Americans ask the same question. How could Russia possibly invade America? And more importantly, could America survive? Stay until the end, because every story may sound familiar. Until I tell it to you. It begins with a shocking announcement. Russia declares that it will attempt to force the United States into surrender. At first, many people simply don't believe it. Because there's an enormous problem. America and Russia aren't neighbors. They're separated by oceans and thousands of miles. So Russia would face one of the biggest challenges imaginable, trying to project enough power across the planet, while keeping everything supplied and coordinated. And America wouldn't just be waiting. The United States has enormous military resources, a huge economy, and a massive geographic advantage. 2 oceans separate much of the country from the rest of the world. And behind those oceans are hundreds of millions of people, and one of the largest industrial economies on Earth. So the moment Russia announced its intentions, America would immediately enter a state of emergency. But then, something much bigger would happen. America's allies would have to choose a side. NATO wouldn't simply be watching from the sidelines. A direct attack on the United States would create an unprecedented crisis for the alliance. European governments would suddenly face an impossible question. Do they treat this as an attack on one country, or as a threat to the entire alliance? And if NATO became directly involved, Russia would no longer be dealing with America alone. The conflict could become global. But there's another problem. Even if Russia somehow managed to establish a presence on American territory, that doesn't mean it could control America. America is enormous. Its cities are spread across a massive continent. Its infrastructure is enormous, and its population is larger than most countries on Earth. Controlling territory, and actually governing it, are 2 completely different things. The longer the conflict continued, the harder everything would become. Supplies would become more difficult. Markets would become unstable. Businesses would close. Transportation would be disrupted. And ordinary people, people who had nothing to do with the decision to start the war, would begin paying the price. Then comes the biggest danger of all: nuclear weapons. Russia and the United States both possess enormous nuclear arsenals. And that's what makes this scenario so terrifying. Because once 2 nuclear powers enter a direct conflict, there is no guaranteed way to control every escalation. One misunderstanding, one false warning, one desperate decision could turn a conventional crisis into something much worse. And suddenly, the question isn't, who wins? It's, can anyone prevent the situation from becoming catastrophic? Meanwhile, China would be watching everything, and so would Europe, Japan, India, the Middle East, and practically every major government on Earth. Because the world's economic system is deeply connected, oil prices could explode, global trade could slow dramatically, financial markets could enter chaos, and supply chains that took decades to build could begin breaking apart in weeks. Technology companies would face disruptions, energy markets would be shaken, and countries that depend heavily on international trade would feel the effects almost immediately. But there's something even more interesting. A war like this could actually make Russia weaker, even if it won some battles. Why? Because invading a country is one thing, but maintaining a massive conflict against an enormous economy while facing international isolation is something completely different. Russia would have to spend enormous resources while dealing with sanctions, economic pressure, and potentially a much larger international coalition. And the United States would face enormous costs too. Millions of lives could be affected, entire communities could be disrupted, and America's economy, despite its enormous strength, would suffer from a conflict on this scale. So after months, or even years, what would the ending look like? The most likely answer isn't a dramatic victory, it's negotiation, because at some point, both sides would have to confront the same reality. There is no easy way to conquer and permanently control a country as large and powerful as the United States. And there is no easy way for Russia to fight a prolonged conflict against America without enormous consequences for itself. So eventually, the fighting would have to stop. Diplomats would meet. Ceasefires would be discussed. Economic agreements would be negotiated. And the world would slowly try to recover. But it would never be the same. America would emerge more militarized. Europe would rethink its security. Russia's economy could be transformed. China's global influence could change dramatically. And the international system could look completely different. So, could Putin actually conquer America? In a purely hypothetical scenario, Russia might be capable of causing enormous disruption. It could potentially threaten American interests and create a global crisis unlike anything we've seen in generations. But completely conquering and permanently controlling the United States? That would be an entirely different challenge. And if nuclear weapons entered the equation, the idea of a winner might disappear completely. Because sometimes, the most dangerous war isn't the one where someone wins. It's the one where nobody can afford to lose. And that leaves us with one final question. What if America decided to strike back and Russia suddenly became the battlefield? Because every question creates another story. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.